Chapter 23 Sunball. Solomon stood before the Sunball field ahead of the tournament. He was reeling from the interaction with His Holiness, his words bouncing around in his mind, as well as the image of Kobe. Solomon was shown to his seat inside the stadium by the guards that had dragged him out of the room. Solomon was not allowed near the edge, nor would His Holiness help him in what he was sent to do. What can I do then? He thought, as he watched the crowds filling into the stadium, the high stands towering upwards. Even despite his mistreatment, as he felt it, his view of the ground was very good. He could see the chessboard-like pitch upon the different shaded squares across the yellow grass. At each end were oblong squares with sunrise at one end and sunset at the other. He gazed across the growing number of people within the stadium. Along the top row were perches where birds sat along, whereas closer to the ground were seats. Solomon found it odd, considering the rank of birds to that of humans, that they were not reversed, but he shrugged and surveyed the people and birds around him. There were noble-like birds in the area where he was located, some bushy birds with dazzling yellow plumage, others like peacocks with long tails that fanned outwards. Soon he saw more different bird varieties like parrots, toucans, parakeets, and more. The birds that were higher up seemed to be common birds like pigeons, sparrows, and seagulls. It made sense to Solomon now why they were located upon perches, whereas the more noble birds had seats closer to the ground. He heard a voice speak within his mind. "Welcome birds and humans of all shapes and sizes to the 21st Sunball tournament," announced the speaker. "Today we will see the reigning champion Nana compete for his third crown in a row. Will he get his hat trick, or will the up-and-comer Cockatoo Collins steal his thunder?" The crowd erupted in various cheers and boos to the respective competitors. "Before we begin the game, we must pay our respects to the goddess with a blessing to her." Solomon's eyes darted to see two golden eagles appearing from the side of the stadium, carrying a disheveled young man. "Daff!" yelled Solomon, but he could not hear him over the roar of the crowd. Solomon watched helplessly as they led him to the center of the field. A hush fell over the crowd as a single ball of light appeared from the sky and descended downwards. Daff struggled to break free from the eagles, but they held him tight as the light touched Daff and he instantly disappeared, leaving a small circular round ball where he stood. "The goddess accepted the offering and has blessed us with the ball for the tournament," announced the speaker. Aghast, Solomon turned away. The light had vaporized him. His thoughts were interrupted as projections were shown across the field, introducing their respective competitors for the Sunball tournament. The need for large screens inside the stadium was not needed, as four-way projections appeared from the ground, showing the stadium everything they needed to see. The announcer began with the female competitors, their faces and body types sleek and focused. Then it was the males. At the announcement of Nana, a huge cheer went up through the stadium, the energy electric. At the announcement of Cockatoo, boos and hisses were heard, to which Solomon cheered loudly, finding himself enjoying the competitiveness. His cheering drew attention from some nearby birds who glanced over and sneered at him. Solomon ignored them, not caring what they thought. He watched as the female competitors took to the field, the crowd eager with anticipation for what was to occur. The ball, sitting in the middle of the pitch, moved by itself to where the female competitor stood. "First we have Zan Thick," said the announcer, as the blonde-haired woman stepped onto the sunrise area part of the field. Instantly, the crowd erupted as the checkered floor began to move and rotate up and down. The dark and lightened squares began to rise and fall like a stormy sea, while geysers of air blasted upwards, spraying debris into the air. Kobe watched as the debris hit a yellow force field, invisible to the eye until a rock touched it, harmlessly bouncing off and remaining within the area. Solomon realized the roof too was limited as the high-flying debris touched the surface of the roof. Now Zan will take her time deciding whether to attempt by air or by land. Solomon watched as the woman pointed to the ground and indicated a land reversal. She made it to the first row of undulating floors, where she was blasted by an unexpected geyser, knocking the ball from her hands. "Unlucky first try. Let's see how Zan goes for her second attempt," said the announcer. Zan drove forward, seemingly trying to best the course. However, she was blasted sky high by an enormous geyser, the crowd oohing and ahhing as she tumbled up and then landed with a heavy crash back onto the surface. "That brings a painful end to Xanthic. Let's see how our next competitor fares." Solomon watched on as several women attempted to cross the seeming impossible field. Many took to the sky to try and find their way, but it too proved just as challenging, with the course increasing the number of geysers and the angles at which they were blown to thwart their attempts. Solomon began to understand the rhythm of the sport, seeing how the competitors tried to duck and weave around the geysers or leap over the moving floor to make it to the other end. However, it seemed all too difficult to accomplish until the second to last female competitor walked onto the pitch, a woman who appeared remarkably familiar to Solomon. Solomon squinted and saw indeed it was the woman who led him under the stadium earlier in the day. She unfurled a set of yellow wings from beneath her arms and took the ball and held it tight. A siren sounded for the start, and she leapt into the air, geysers erupting all across the field as the floor rippled like an angry sea. She dove and weaved between the geysers, seemingly inconsequential to her, as she made it to the halfway mark. "She's going well, and you'd expect it from the former champion's daughter," remarked the announcer. The severity of the course seemed to get tougher as she tried for the second half, the winds blowing more fiercely around as she ducked and weaved through the chaos before her. Solomon watched as she hit the highest point of the field and made a nosedive straight down through the debris and streams of air. "She's making a swan dive for a sunset," roared the announcer, the crowd yelling with excitement. Displayed on the projections, Solomon saw Cyber cross over the line of the sunset, the crowd erupting in celebration. "She's done it!" exclaimed the announcer. "The first woman of the day to complete a sundown. What an extraordinary performance we've seen, and on her first attempt as well." Cyber waved to the crowd, soaking up the admiration for her efforts. "Now the field will be reset for her second attempt. Note, the difficulty will be increased for each subsequent sundown," said the announcer. Cyber rose into the air from where she stood, yellow wings beating as the words on the field changed ends, resulting in her needing to attempt to get back to where she had first started. The course seemed even more ferocious as it began to gather speed, the winds howling and the earth going up and down violently, as though angry she had made it through the first time. Solomon leapt out of his seat, as did the birds around him, as she weaved and dove her way back through the course. A cheer resounded across the field as she deftly navigated the mad geysers, high-pressure air blasts, and pillars of earth that longed to knock her to the ground. Somehow, someway, Cyber had defied the angry obstacle course and crossed the sundown line holding the golden ball once again. A thunderous round of applause resounded through the arena, the fans in raptures over the performance. "She's done it again!" cheered the announcer. "What an unbelievable performance! I can't believe it. 2 consecutive sundowns for Cyber. This is one for the record books. No such thing has ever been accomplished in a woman's tier. You are witnessing history today," he crowed. Once more, Cyber waved to the crowds, drinking up the adulation. Solomon joined in somewhat reluctantly, knowing how she had treated him and his late friend Daff. Though he could not argue, she was an incredible athlete. His mind wandered to think what was beneath that jumpsuit, but shook his head at the thought. "Now she will try for the third sundown in a row," interrupted the announcer. "Will we see even more records fall today? The course is angry with her. Let's see how she fares." The course did indeed seem angry. If Solomon had thought it was tempestuous before, it was borderline psychotic now. The ground heaved and spewed forth boulder-sized rocks out of the geysers which blew in various directions. The crowd ducked for cover as car-sized stones were heaved against the force field, only to bounce off and fall into the field or be caught up in another gale. Solomon could see the winds howling against Cyber, her hair blowing straight back as she readied herself for the third attempt. The crowd chanted her name as she lifted her wings and soared up into the air, the golden sunball illuminated brightly. She dashed through the maelstrom and was consumed by forces, her body lost amongst the debris, wind, and writhing earth. It was only a short few moments later that the ball, knocked free, rolled onto the ground, and the crowd let out an exasperated sigh, disappointed by the outcome. Yet there was no sign of Cyber. Everyone craned to see where she was until a shout came, and the screens revealed a body crumpled upon the ground as the course flattened and the geysers silenced. The emergency crew flew in from the edges of the field, inspecting her before levitating her body off the ground and into the bowels of the stadium. "The finest professionals will heal Cyber Sun. We will wish her a speedy recovery and a triumphant return," said the announcer. "With the ball knocked free, she is the only female competitor to have scored twice. Only one female competitor stands in her way from victory, Pantone." Instantly the crowd booed en masse as the competitor came into view, a regular woman with long flowing hair, yet with no bird-like features. The birds in the stands nearby Solomon had particular distaste for her, including a fat parrot that was sitting nearby. "Get the fuck out of here!" screeched the fat parrot. "She's nothing but scum, unclean to set foot on the turf." Cheers of agreement went up around him. Solomon took an instant dislike to the parrot. The woman stood in her position. The crowd booing increased as she tucked the sunball under her arm and awaited the field. Solomon cheered amidst the booing as she rose and made her way across the course, its intensity lesser than that of Cyber's. The crowd seemed to completely forget about the former competitor, focused entirely on the non-bird-like woman who swooped and dove across the field in metal wings. The crowd booed and hissed as she flew, some debris being thrown from the crowd hitting the force field and bouncing back to people seated at the lower levels. "We remind those attending today to respect all competitors," reminded the announcer. This seemed to only anger the birds even more, who, despite the performance of the woman who had just crossed the sundown line, was met with a string of curses and insults, boos and hisses. Solomon did his best to cheer over the din, but it was overwhelmingly negative towards the non-bird competitor. Pan waved her hand at the crowd, as though they were not against her, and readied herself for another attempt. "A sundown! What a brilliant performance from the young woman!" crowed the announcer. "Can she match the same intensity as Cyber Sun? We've got reports that she's stable and now okay." The image on the big projection flashed to Cyber Sun, who was smiling and waving in a bed, the crowd cheering at her appearance, making Solomon feel somewhat relieved. Now Pan will attempt another run through the course. Yet again the crowd turned to boos as the female competitor rose into the air, the course angrier than its first incarnation. She dove and wove through the geysers and debris, wanting and desperately vying for another sundown to match that of her previous competitor. Solomon found himself cheering on, drawing ire from the birds around him. Despite his lack of interest in sports, he couldn't help but cheer for the minority. As he did so, the fat bird turned towards him. "Keep your mouth shut," shouted the fat parrot. "Why should I?" said Solomon bravely. "She's a competitor just like all the others." "You should care, or I'll rip that cheap augment clean off your face and show everyone who you really are, no beak," he threatened. Solomon bit his tongue and turned back to the woman on the field, his face flushed with anger. The woman came to the three-quarter length of the field when a geyser shot out and collected her mid-air, the ball tumbling out of her arms and onto the ground. "Oh, hard luck there," said the announcer, as the rapturous applause of the woman not making it resounded in the stadium. "She was so close." The group of birds nearby Solomon cheered loudly. "You're a joke, human," shouted the fat bird. "Go back to the bottom of the cage where you belong." "Grow some real wings," shouted another, and they all laughed uproariously, making Solomon's blood boil. Solomon had not been the kind to antagonize. He liked to be calm and collected, but he could not stand the mistreatment of others. It had been something he'd fought against his whole life. "I'd like to see you make a sundown," said Solomon hotly towards the group of birds. They spun around and glared at him, eyes narrowing in anger. "What did you say, no beak?" said the fat parrot. "You heard," replied Solomon. "Why don't you take to the field and show us how it's done, seeing as you are a prize athlete?" Solomon drew a few hears from around him, seeming to gain support. "I could wipe the floor with that filthy human's attempt," said the fat parrot. "Don't think I could." "Get out there, then. Why not show us how good you are?" The fat parrot glanced around him. "I'm not eligible for the women's, mate. That's more your field, I think." He drew laughs from the birds around him. "Why don't you mind your own business and keep quiet, no beak?" sneered the parrot. "All my boys and I will break more than just your beak. Last warning, you don't want to know what's going to happen if you irritate me again." He glared at Solomon and turned around, his friends laughing before they flew up into the air, bound for somewhere else during the Sunball halftime break.